Welcome to what I believe is the most interesting story associated with any lantern clock I've ever restored. In this presentation, I shall take you through the process of reinstatement of a movement to an old lantern clock that had suffered a transplant at some time in the past 150 years. What really drew my attention to this clock was that it was engraved on the dial as being from MALTESE, which is Latin for Malta. I'd never seen or heard of any clock as old as this being from Malta. Based on the clock frame and the original parts remaining with the purchase, I put its age at 1750. Shown here is a Knight of St. John and a sea battle between the Knights of St. John and the Ottoman Turks, both of which are contemporary to the clock. So why are they on the title page? I'll tell you shortly. So this is what I purchased on eBay back in August last year. It has a beautifully engraved solid brass dial with its original old iron frame. It was modified in the past 150 years or so though, with the removal of the original time and strike mechanism and replaced with a high quality 5-post fusee time and strike movement. To accommodate the winding of the fusee movement, 2 holes were drilled through the dial, and also a great part of the bottom iron plate was cut away for the fusee pendulum movement. Here we see the dial engraved with T. Agius of MALTESE, which translates today out of the Latin into T. Agius in Malta. Even today though, the family name of Agius is very popular in Malta, and in fact there is a watch shop still operating in Valletta in Malta, and you can see on the top shelf they have a few clocks for sale as well. This is a map of Malta drawn up by Nicholas Vischer in 1670, and in the top right corner it shows MALTESE or Malta, and it also shows the cross of St. John, which is sometimes white on a red background and other times red on a white background. Down in the bottom insert you can see how strategic Malta is. It's located right in the centre of the Mediterranean Sea. Now for some history. When I really got down and studied this dial, I was amazed at the animals that were engraved on it. They were so animated that I thought they must have a meaning or a story. In the top left and right hand corners there's 2 very upset and disturbed birds of prey. At the bottom in the centre of the dial there's a bird's nest full of chicks who are greatly distressed also because they're being attacked by 2 lions. So this is how I interpret the story behind this dial. After the loss of Jerusalem in 1187 to the Ottoman Turks, the Knights of St. John, who were the hospitallers to the pilgrims of the Crusades, were driven out of Acre, then on to Cyprus, and then to Rhodes over a period of 300 years and more. And finally, in 1524, the Turks drove them out of Rhodes. In 1530, Charles V, King of Sicily, and also the Holy Roman Emperor, leased the island of Malta to the Knights of St. John for the annual fee of 1 Maltese falcon. And ever since, the falcon has been symbolic of Malta. In 1565, the Ottoman Turks besieged Malta for 10 months. And these Turks were known as the Lions of Islam. So, the birds of prey at the top of the dial are the greatly disturbed Knights of St. John looking down on the Lions of Islam laying siege to the island full of Maltese people. This is truly remarkable. It's a historic record. Today the Order of St. John remains and is represented in the St. John ambulance with the Maltese cross as their emblem. With the fusee movement removed from the frame, the original rope holes, movement locating holes, many of the escapement holes, and many of the original parts could be seen clearly. The original iron hook at the top of the dial and the locating pins at the bottom of the dial holding it in place were clearly visible. The bottom iron plate showed layers separating, and this told me that the sheet had been made by folding and hammering while red hot as a form of forge welding, and the top plate shows similar separation, a true indication that this case was blacksmith made. The fitting of the fusee movement to the clock had required 2 holes be pierced through the dial to allow for winding. I had to get rid of these holes. The big hole at the top of the dial, however, was the original cowtail pendulum hole, so I wanted to retain that. The winding holes I plugged with cast brass plugs from behind, then engraved the front blank part of the plug to match in with the engraving on the dial. To refit a replica movement to this clock frame, I needed to make 3 vertical narrow plates to carry the pivots of the wheel arbors. And from the locating holes in the top and bottom horizontal plates, I determined the length, width and thickness of these 3 plates. And these plates tapered from bottom to top in both thickness and width. I used 5mm engraver's brass to cut out the plates, then used a shaping machine to plane metal away to the required taper with a thickness of 5mm at the bottom and 3mm at the top. So 2mm of packing was put under the metal and the shaper then planed away over the length of the plate, generating the taper I required. And these plates are then wedged into the clock frame with brass plate wedges. To create a time train, I needed the length of the pendulum I'd just made as a test, and from that length I was then able to select wheels from my junk box with counts that would give me a going train to suit that pendulum. All these wheels and arbors and pinions are recycled from old movements. The motion work for the hands is driven straight off the end of the great wheel arbor using again a pinion of report, but this clock has got 2 hands, so you can see there is a duplication of the gear work to bring it up for the hour hand and the minute hand. And have a look at that hammer that I found to put on top of the hammer post. A fist with a nice big stick that would hit hard against the bell. And also you can see the gantry that I've created across the top, cantilevering out over the front of the movement, which will ultimately go through the hole in the top of the dial to carry the front pinion for the Pallet Arbor and for the pendulum. Once the great wheel's in place, it's a matter then of creating the arbors, pinions and wheels for each of the next step in the movement, and these are then depthed and then planted into the movement plates. And gradually we move up the train towards the escapement. The contract wheel has been made and fitted to its arbor and is now meshing with the vertical escape wheel arbor. Again, it's seated into a potence attached to the center plate. The escape wheel is above the top plate, so it has a top pivot hanging down from that gantry that I'd created across the top of the movement. To create the escape wheel, I've used my 8mm Lorch lathe with a vertical milling head and a dividing plate attachment to index the wheel blank around. Then the cutter generates the profile as it's driven through the blank, and you can see the formation of those teeth in the picture. With the time train complete, the next step was to make the pallet arbor, and this is done by inserting the pallets into dovetail slots in the arbor itself. The gantry that crosses over the top of the movement carries both the front and back pivots of the pallet arbor, but the front one is out on the end of the gantry, and there's a brass disc with a pivot hole to carry that front pivot. The pendulum also hangs from the arbor out adjacent to that carrier. This clock is weight driven with a rope carrying the weights, so I needed to make a spiked rope wheel with click work to engage on the great wheel spokes. The pendulum was reshaped to hang clear of the centre of the hand arbor and at the right length for timekeeping. This is the completed time train, from the motion work or the hand wheels up through the great wheel to the escapement. This is how the clock would have looked when it was originally made in 1750. The quality indicates that it would have been owned by a wealthy trader, merchant in Malta, or one of the higher ranking Knights of St. John. When I asked one of my Maltese friends about Malta in this period, he said the Maltese people could not have made this clock. They were still out chasing rabbits. A clock of this calibre had to have a wall bracket which reflected and reinforced its origins and history. The Maltese cross had to be part of the design, and the small badge with the Maltese cross was my mother's from her service as a nurse in World War II. I may be prejudiced, but what can I say? Wow, this clock turned out really great. Now I have to make the striking train. Thanks for watching this presentation. If you have any questions that you'd like to send to me, you can do that to my email address at the bottom of this page. Thank you.